Hello and welcome to my fireside chat on the 12 associated clinical signs. Um, in this segment, I'm going to comment on ACS2, empowering the child's rejection of the other parent. Now, ACS2 often goes with ACS1. You'll see them paired. We can't, we shouldn't force the child to be with the other parent. The child should be allowed to decide to go on visitations. So it's part of a dynamic of power and manipulation, these two symptoms used together. And just to begin again with the information about these 12 ACS is available on ResearchGate, Greenham, Childress, and Pruder. You can go read all about them and the prevalence in the family courts. Uh, with the Greenham, Childress, and Pruder, we found that all 46 of the families that we looked at that were having court-involved custody conflict and all the data, we looked at the data of that. All 46 had the three diagnostic indicators of pathogenic parenting that I identify in foundations. Then 46 of the 46 families, all the families, had 5 or more of the associated clinical signs, and 45 of them had 8 or more. So only one family had 5, everybody else had 8 or more of the 12 ACS identified in the data. I suspect those numbers would go up if we actually collected the data through clinical interviews rather than just documented data around these families. The prevalence of ACS2, empowering the child to reject the other parent, 100%. So it showed up all the time, consistently, that we should allow the child to decide on visitations. And what this symptom is the allied parent empowers the child to reject the parent. It has to do with cross-generational coalition and manipulation, various aspects of the pathology. So the empowerment of the child to reject a parent is a manipulative product of the cross-generational coalition with the allied parent, and it represents a symptom feature of an inverted hierarchy where the child becomes empowered by the alliance to judge the targeted parent as if the parent were the child and the child were the parent. This is a prominent symptom feature you will see with this, the inverted hierarchy. And so if you're not familiar with family systems and you're a mental health professional working with family conflict, oh my goodness, that's a problem. Because this symptom feature just stands out, the inverted hierarchy, the child judging the parent as if the parent were the child and the child were the parent, the adequacy. And so in an inverted hierarchy, the child assumes a position of power and authority over the targeted parent. And so that's what the pathological parent is empowering that child into a position of over the targeted parent, where the child can then reject the targeted parent. So they're empowering the child's rejection of the targeted parent. And the type of sentences you'll hear is, oh, the child should decide on visitation, or we need to listen to the child, or seeking the child's testimony in court. If a parent seeks a child's testimony in court, that's ACS2, and that's a highly problematic parent, We need to de-triangulate the child, and that parent's putting the child right in the middle. And all of this is putting the child right in the middle. This symptom, interestingly enough, represents a corrective change to the trauma reenactment narrative. In the original childhood trauma, the narcissistic borderline dark personality parent as a child was powerless. But in the trauma reenactment narrative, the supposedly victimized child of the current situation is now being empowered to reject the allegedly abusive parent. And so let me talk about that corrective aspect, because that's a very important feature of the trauma reenactment. And in trauma pathology, it's associated with a trauma reenactment narrative, transference, schemas, internal working models, variously described within the professional trauma reenactment, Vanderkook. And what the brain replicates the traumatic experiences. So in this case, it's the attachment trauma of the allied parent as a child that now they grow up and they're replicating certain features of that, their own childhood in the current situation. And in replicating these patterns, what the brain does, what we do, is we make slight changes in the replication from the original event that then serve as a corrective experience. That's we're trying to work it through with the replication. So, for an example, if we're working with a sexually abused child in play therapy and dollhouse, and the child may replicate the sexual abuse in the doll play therapy, but they'll start to add over time, little at first and more larger later, changes to the play that then serve as a corrective experience for them in working through their trauma. That's the purpose of the trauma reenactment. We reenactment and then we make corrective changes to it. Well, in this case, the pathological parent, the allied parent, was experienced some sort of attachment trauma experience in childhood, and they are replicating that in the current situation with the false narrative, the trauma narrative of abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent. That's your trauma child abuse narrative. Abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent. But in this case, it's just parent, child, parent. There's no abusive, there's no victimized, there's no, but the pathological parent has that pattern in their brain from their own childhood abuse. One parent's abusive, child's being victimized. In their own childhood, though, they had no protective parent. And so they were abused and nobody came to rescue them. Nobody came to help them. And so that's the deficit in that model or in that pattern. There's an abusive parent, there was a victimized child, but there was no protective parent to take care of them. So now, when they replicate this pattern into the current situation, the role of the protective parent is essential for correcting that internal experience of their own childhood trauma. And guess who gets to fill that role? They do. And so the moment they get the child to believe they're being victimized, they create the victimized child role. Well, that automatically defines the other parent as abusive, right? Because we're having to force the child to be with that parent. So clearly that parent's abusive. So now we got the abusive parent and the victimized child roles all set. And so now, though, the important feature is that the pathological parent, the allied parent, now gets to adopt the protective parent role. And they get to sweep in and protect the child from the abusive parent and in the process work through their own stuff. So this role of the protective parent and ACS2 is going to be critical. And you see it 100% of the time. This is going to be critical. And if you try to take them out of that protective role, and this is a response to intervention, try to take the allied parent out of the protective role with the child, they've got to be in that role because that's key to them working through their own trauma anxiety and regulating their own trauma anxiety. I'm protecting the child. When the divorce takes place, the attachment networks mediate all aspects of love and bonding throughout the lifespan, including grief and loss. So they get married, you form an attachment bond. A divorce is a breach in the attachment bond between the spouses, the spousal attachment bond. So at that breach, the attachment systems activate to manage the grief, to regulate all the grief response. So you get the breach, active attachment systems go active, and all the trauma that's in that attachment network also gets activated at the same time. Okay, so when the attachment system activates, it activates for the targeted parent as well. And if they have any trauma in there, it's going to get active. And so all these perceptions begin to emerge on this situation. And we take a normal range, a reality-based set of relationships of parent, child, parent, normal range, and it becomes abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent, false trauma, a kabuki theater of false display. And so that's ACS2 in the family courts, and you'll see it with ACS1. So we shouldn't force the child to go and then empowering. So disempowering one side and empowering the child to be able to reject the parent. And sort of in closing, they manipulate the child into this false belief that they're being victimized. And the moment they manipulate the child, they can put the child out in front, knowing that the child's like a performing monkey or something for them. The child's going to say, "Oh, I don't like being with the targeted parent," and so then they say, "Oh, we should, listen to the child," knowing because they manipulated exactly that situation from the child. So it's like almost like using a human shield as well. We can't get at the actual source of the decision making because or the influence because the child's always out in front. And anytime we try to get at them, they put the child. It's a child, and that's later ACS. So with that, follow me over, and we'll talk about ACS 3, the exclusion demand, which is an interesting one. The exclusion demand, I think, is it's not always present, but when it's present, it's 100% diagnostic. So follow me over to that. And we'll talk about that one.